Good afternoon, everyone. If I can call this meeting to order, please. Good afternoon, and welcome to this regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for Leap Day, Monday, February 29th, 2016. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, joined by my colleagues, Council Members Bonin, Blumenfield, and Englander, and we are ready to begin. Are there any general public comment cards?
There are no cards at this time, sir.
All right. General public comment is closed. Are there any cards on any of our agenda items?
No cards at this time.
All right. We'll close public comment on the agenda items as well. And Mr. Kretz is here as well for the record. So just for planning purposes, we're going to take our closed session items after we consider the FSR. So I guess we'll be... Yes, we'll be taking item 6 out of order, and then we'll be coming back to our closed session items. So, as we typically do, members, I'd like to ask if there are any department-specific questions that any of you have for our departmental representatives so that we can identify who needs to stay and who can go. So, who would like to begin with that list? Mr. Blumenfield?
City Attorney, Fire Department, Planning, Sanitation.
Whoa, slow down. City Attorney, Fire, Planning.
Sanitation, DOT, and Animal Service.
Okay. Mr. Englander?
No, I'm good. That covers.
All right.
I think half of
Mr. Kretz?
personnel.
Okay. Mr. Bonin?
I have nothing to add to what Mr. Blumenfield said.
Figured I'd throw them all out there.
All right. Last chance. All right. So, if you are representing the City Attorney's Office, the Fire Department, Planning, Sanitation, DOT, Animal Services, or Personnel, please stay. Anybody else who's not on that list, get out while the getting's good. Thank you all very much for coming down. Which is that? Yeah, it is. Okay, members, keep the noise down, folks, because we still have to work while you're exiting, please. Members, while they're on their way out, before we take up the FSR, item number 3 is appropriate for resolution on consent, and our assigned counsel has a conflict, needs to go. So unless there's questions or concerns about that, I'd like to propose that we approve the City Attorney's recommendations on that matter. There's any? Okay. There being no objection, that will be the action of the committee. So item number 3, we will approve the City Attorney's recommendations. And that brings us then back to item number 6. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Miguel Santana, CAO. As you know, we submit a FSR every year in the middle of the year to reflect sort of where we were through December 30th. So there's a number of things to report. Overall, we are continue to face a deficit in relation to both revenue and expenditures. The revenue side, a deficit of about $119 million, an expenditure of $39 million. To address those deficits, our goal is to keep the reserve fund as intact as possible, but we're sort of alerting you now that it's going to be very challenging to do so. We do think that even if we have to borrow from the reserve fund, we will be meeting our 5% general fund goal, or policy as established by this committee and the council. The explanation of the shortfalls, the 119 million, 97 of it is due to a misinterpretation of the triple flip. The triple flip is very complicated. We anticipated that about over 60 million of it would be coming in the current fiscal year. It's actually coming at the beginning of the next fiscal year. So it's not that we're not receiving it, but we're just receiving it a few weeks after the fiscal year ends. And then 39 million of it we're not receiving at all. In terms of the expenditure side, we continue to pay down various cases. As you know, given that your committee has been hearing them one by one, we'll end up the year probably spending twice as much on litigation than what was originally budgeted. We budgeted about 60, we'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of 120. We have some shortfalls in human resources, benefits, and in fire, but those we believe we could be managing. We also have a slight shortfall on the revenue as it relates to the transfer. The transfer is about $8 million less than what we had anticipated. Sales tax is about $10 million less due to gas prices being lower than what was projected, and parking fines are about $11 million less than what was on plan. In terms of the actions that are laid out, we have a number of recommendations to try to eliminate the deficit for the current fiscal year. Again, with the goal of not using the reserve fund as a way of getting there, at least not at this point. A number of savings on the benefit side due to the low costs of gas. We're spending less than what we had budgeted on petroleum, about $9 million. We did well on the TRAN this year. We expect about $15 million worth of savings from what was budgeted in the TRAN. In other areas, in terms of the we do recommend taking from some of the UB accounts that have been set aside for this purpose. We are recommending, I know the transfer from the DWP has been sent to the city. It's scheduled to be in full council for adoption sometime after you return from recess. Because there is a 30-day period in which, the transfer actually itself is an ordinance, we are recommending that the controller use all funds as possible to borrow from, which is consistent with city policy, to make sure we meet cash flow. We've been reassured that the transfer will be accepted by the council sometime by mid-March. But that just gives us a little bit more flexibility for cash flow purposes. Because things are tight in the current fiscal year, we are recommending that departments be mindful of spending because of the overall context that we're facing currently now. So with that, we'll be happy to answer some general questions, and my staff is here to respond to any specific departmental questions that you may have.
Very good. Thank you. Members, questions for the CAO? Mr. Kretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So is part of this shortfall because the economy is slowing? Or is it just a quirky thing like the price of gasoline going down?
I think we are seeing some initial signs of a slowdown in the economy, not significant, but in terms of the documentary transfer tax, sales tax, most of it, again, is driven by gasoline prices, but some of it is due to just volume. We'll know better once we get the latest business tax receipts. I don't know if when you came on, you saw the huge line outside of people getting ready to pay their business tax. The business tax is one of the indicators of the economy. But it's premature to say this is a time of year that we're starting to do revenue projections for the budget. Part of that work means sitting down with economists. Folks are still optimistic about the LA economy, but certainly what's happening on a global level and a national level provides some level of worrisome. But given what we've seen in the past, certainly we're much better off. The revenue shortfall, the biggest part is due to the misinterpretation of the triple flip. The majority of those funds we'll be getting, but we'll be getting the next fiscal year, not in this fiscal year. So we'll have to make up for that difference by borrowing from the reserve fund for this year and then pay it back next fiscal year.
And the triple flip, why do we have money coming to us, and is it a one-time thing, or is this something that'll be more ongoing?
Sure. Melissa Krantz, Office of the CAO. So the triple flip actually ended. They paid off the bonds, and the state stopped collecting the 0.25%, which they were siphoning off from sales tax. So as a result, we are now no longer receiving the property tax, sales tax replacement component. We got a small portion, but it's actually being deferred, which is why we are seeing a shortfall. This is a cash flow shortfall. It's not extra. It's money that's due the city. It's just not going to be remitted during the current fiscal year. It's going to be remitted at the start of next fiscal year. In terms of property tax, it's still on time. We've accrued it during the 15-16 fiscal year, but we're just not going to get to the cash flow until 16-17.
So as far as the triple flip, is this something that's just a makeup for this year, or is this extra money that we will now get in the future?
It's not extra money. It just we were anticipating getting the funds in the current fiscal year. We're actually not going to get it until the next fiscal year. So we're still getting $60 million, but that's coming in the fiscal year that's coming, not in the current one. We budgeted for this current fiscal year.
It's
And-
just
and
a
if I may-
one-time,
Yes.
just a
Yes.
one-time.
This is a one-time problem.
If I may clarify, this is the end of the triple flip. So after this, after we get that final payment next year in August of that property tax sales tax replacement component, we will no longer get that revenue. Instead, we will be getting higher sales tax receipts.
Does it break us even? Does it?
Yes, it would break us even.
That's the intent, is to break us even.
Well, I think I had to vote on the triple flip about 15 years ago, but it was so complicated that I'm not sure that anybody fully understood it.
Yes, it's
And that's
very-
probably still the case.
It's very complicated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bonner?
Thank you. A few different questions. The council just approved its big comprehensive homelessness strategy. In what way does the FSR begin to address that, or are we really tabling that discussion until the next year's budget we start discussing next month?
Well, we're still spending the funds that were put aside. So a lot of it was was given to LASA for rapid rehousing, for expansion of the storage capacity program. And so that work continues. We are recommending $500,000 to study the Nexus study for purposes of future revenue. So that is in the budget, in the FSR.
That's the linkage fees?
Yes. And in terms of any additional funds beyond what was approved, and again, beyond the 500, that is it. So because we're so close to the release of the budget, the next big method in which an investment will be made will be through the budget process. Now, we are looking at making sure that the funds that were appropriated for homelessness in the current fiscal year are spent. We're starting to track that more closely, and we're also trying to find a mechanism to ensure that those that remain get continued and don't get swept back, so that they get protected from the normal budgeting process that we engage in. And we're starting to drill down, as you know, in the plan. We had a number of initiatives that the committee and the council identified as priorities. My staff, working with the CLA, is finding how to score each one so that we actually have a better sense of the actual costs associated with those initiatives to help through this budget process that's coming up.
We allocated money for homelessness-related stuff for El Nino. El Nino hasn't really manifested in the way we thought it was going to, thankfully. Some of us, Mr. Cedillo and I, for instance, may have pilot programs that we want to start for storage or for mobile showers or for some of the first-hit street strategy elements of the comprehensive homelessness strategy. Is there the potential that rather than waiting until July 1 of next year, some of the El Nino homelessness money, which may not have been spent, could be used for some of those purposes in this fiscal year?
Yes. I mean, those funds were put aside for that purpose.
Great.
They're, you delegated the expenditure of those dollars to the coordinating committee Obviously, there hasn't been the kind of storm that we expected, and, I think once we get through March without any major rain, or, then at that point, we will, in the context of probably one of the FSRs, but also reporting to the Homeless Committee,
Yep.
how to best spend those dollars. At minimum, at least my office will recommend that those dollars not get swept and be committed to homeless-related programs to the remainder of the fiscal year and the next fiscal year.
Thank you.
And if I may, Mr. Bonnet, my recollection was council so instructed
That's
at
correct.
the time that we appropriated
Yeah.
those funds, that
That's
they would
right.
not be swept into
That's
the general
right.
fund, but they would remain
Thank
with
you.
homeless program.
On the Nexus study for the linkage fee, who's going to be conducting that?
It's being done by planning. They're hiring a consultant to begin that study.
How long would we think that'll take?
It's my understanding it's going to take them about 6 months to complete.
Okay. You mentioned the DWP transfer being smaller than we had anticipated by 6 or 7 million or so, 8 million. And you also mentioned, and I just wanted to be clear on this, there's some connection in timing of the transfer based on when or whether this body approves the rate hike?
So the way the transfer works is the charter establishes when we're informed of the amount and when we receive the check. The DWP completed its obligation. It has to go through the committee process at the council, then ultimately gets scheduled. It's scheduled to be on the council agenda most likely in mid-March, which then it gets deposited. There's a 30-day period in which, because it's an ordinance, that we have to wait until it gets fully deposited. Our cash flows, it's sort of doing the analogy with your own personal income. You get paid every 2 weeks. Our cash flows assume we're getting the transfer on a particular date. It's slightly later than we expect. And so what happens during those times is that the controller has the authorization to borrow from other funds to be able to make up those differences, sort of the equivalent of dipping into your savings account while you know a check is coming. And so we're through this FSR, we're reinforcing that. We're recommending that you instruct the controller to borrow from whatever funds are necessary to make sure that we make up the cash flow aspect of the timing of when the check gets deposited and the time the funds are needed.
But the timing of the transfer to us has nothing to do with, or does it have anything to do with the timing of our vote on the revenue increase for water and power? No, okay, all right. I was just, I thought I misheard you. I just
No,
wanted to make sure.
the timing, the transfer is related to the previous year's revenues
Right.
at the DWP. It has nothing to do with what's happening in the future.
Okay. And then my last question was, you said in your opening remarks, and there was reference to it in the report, that you wanted departments to be mindful of their spending for the rest of the year. I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on what that means. I know that, I think there was reference in the written report to asking departments not to do any more hiring. I know that there's some departments, for instance DOT, where we wanted them this year to create a position to begin to bring back the speed hump program.
Mm-hmm.
And that this one position was going to start creating that and figure out how folks could at least allow developers to pay for speed humps. Because it takes us so ridiculously long to get through the hiring process here in Los Angeles. If we have departments that have been working for 9 months to create a position that this council tried to create a year ago, I just want to make sure we're not, through this action, doing anything that stops that.
No, I mean, managed hiring doesn't exist anymore, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So departments are on their own able to hire, working through the personnel department. We're not recommending the resurrection of managed hiring or any action on behalf of this committee or the council that would restrict hiring. We're just making an overarching statement that we would encourage departments as they, like in my own office, to decide, okay, I need 10, so many positions, 5 positions this year, examine the 5, could I survive with 3, right? And so each department, each general manager can make that assessment on their own. Obviously, to the extent to which we have any excess funds, that helps our reserve and it helps next year's budget. And As a reminder, next year, we're facing a minimum of a $90 million deficit. And so it's just a reminder that things are tight, but, we've experienced tighter. And so we just all be mindful of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bloomfield.
Thank you. Just starting on the triple flip, remembering that from the state days, and a lot of, each time we tweaked it, there's always like 3 true-up mechanisms. So I'm assuming that whatever true-up mechanisms that we are, if there's any chance of us losing money, we'll go back and true it up, because there should be 6 different ways to do that.
That is
even
one of the
if it's
reasons-
just for timing.
That is the reason for the delayed payment, actually, is they're going to try to make sure that they have finalized receipts before they remit the final balance in August.
Last year's budget expected a 10% healthcare premium for civilian employees as of the first of this year, but that obviously didn't materialize. So how is that affecting the budget at this point?
So that's part of what's creating the expenditure deficit. I think we had identified about $8 million for that purpose, and the deal that we struck with the coalition does not have that 10%. It has another mechanism, which establishes a framework, but it doesn't fulfill that $8 million shortfall.
So I'm sorry.
It does not. The coalition deal does not fill that $8 million shortfall.
Right, and so that's part of where this deficit is going.
That's correct.
And in terms of deficits, I mean, the overall question of structural deficit, nothing we're doing here is going to change that trajectory. We were on, I always ask, we're on a 2-year trajectory to get rid of it. Maybe we see what happens in this coming up budget, but that's still where we're at this point. Is that right?
We haven't revised the forecast. The forecast we only do at the time that the mayor releases his budget, and then again after the council approves it. So, revenues go up and down. Expenditures change on an almost quarterly basis. So it would be sort of a moving target if we revised it. So no, we haven't revised it. Overall, if you sort of take a macro look at what's happening outside of the issue of the triple flip, we're not too far off from plan, right? Expenditures are within the realm of being manageable. I mean, your committee has seen a lot worse. Revenues are close to tracking. There's an explanation for the sales tax, mainly dealing with property, with gas taxes being low. So this is, I would say, the city is. We still be cautious and be conservative, but this is a healthy budget.
And which is great, and I'm excited about the possibility of getting over that hump of the structural deficit, keeping in mind debt and everything else, but that'd be a nice thing to get behind us. We mentioned that the property tax, sales tax shortfalls. I understand the sales tax directly linked to the gas situation. Why the property tax?
That's a triple flip.
That's just
Yeah.
There's nothing else.
There is a second component. Our secured receipts came in early in the end of 14-15, and as a result, we've been running a shortfall in secured receipts through the year. So there's about a $25 million shortfall for the assessed value. Now, that shortfall is because we got money early, not because we got it late. So
It's not that, because as I understand it, property values have been going up. We're in good shape as far as that.
they have been going on. I would like to caution, we did budget like an increase in supplemental receipts, which is what you pay when you purchase a home, and we hadn't seen the growth that we forecasted with that. Also, our documentary transfer tax, which is increasing, isn't increasing at the lines that we projected. So they are growing like sales tax, they're just not growing as optimistically as we projected.
So this is an important point. So I guess in talking to the economists, the question is that the two indicators of sort of the transfer of property, is it due to housing prices being so high that now people aren't purchasing, or is there something else going on? And so we're at a point where we don't know, because there's less activity than what we had originally projected, and because the other side of prices increasing is that suddenly people start buying less. So that's one of the things to look out for as we monitor property taxes in the future.
So the values are still going up, the activity has slowed
Slowing down.
The reflection, the shortfall is not due to any negative curve, it's just due to the more optimistic projections that we had
Correct.
last year, and due to the fact that we got money in early, money that would have been part of this year that we were able to take advantage of
Last year.
Correct.
which hopefully bodes well for next year, meaning that we won't have that problem and it'll already be baked into the assumptions.
This
Great.
Mr. Englander, anything from the CIO? All right, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Kretz had another.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had a question for personnel, but it's really probably more a question for you, which is, we're encouraging departments not to do any hiring that can be avoided. I just flag the fact that that probably doesn't make sense for the personnel department, which is pretty far behind the 8 ball and has all kinds of backlogs. So I don't know if you intend on including them with that thought, but I would certainly say for the record that we should discourage that thinking in that department so we can help the rest of the city catch up. And in fact, I think they asked for some additional money for police recruitment, and
Yes.
I assume we're asking for that money.
Yeah, and some of that I think will be reflected in next year's budget, but one of the perks of being personnel is that you manage your own hiring and the process, so I'm sure that will be a priority for them.
Very good, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Since we're on personnel, Mr. Blumenfield, do you have
Personnel is
questions?
the one I didn't mention.
Okay. Oh, it's the one you didn't mention, that's right.
And I'm taken care of,
And you're
so
taken
that-
care
so
of.
they- anyone that's here from
All right.
personnel, you're,
Personnel, thank you very much for being here. See you next time. All right, that brings it, why don't we go ahead and bring up planning then next? Good afternoon, and I'll throw it to Mr. Blumenfield.
Just planning has a surplus, and you're also trying to get up to speed on the hiring. We have a lot of planning issues all over the city that are in desperate need of folks. So what's the schedule for that? When will we get those hires done and take advantage of the surplus?
Good afternoon, Jason Klein, Office of the City Administrative Officer. City Planning actually has a very aggressive hiring plan through the end of the fiscal year. They just finished hiring over 40 planning assistants since last fall. So now they actually have an eligible list for senior city planners. So they're going to start filling senior city planners off the list, which will create city planner vacancies. Then they'll move to the city planner list, hire off of that list, and then they'll get back down to the planning assistant list and hire new planners coming in from the outside. We're also working with them to fill the housing unit, which the council just approved last week. We're working with the personnel department, who's going to add those new positions to the next Civil Service Commission to get them allocated. The intent is for those positions to be added to the eligible cert list for the city planner and senior city planner list, so those positions can be filled and hired and start working on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as soon as the RFPs come back.
And I guess I would note, notwithstanding everything that Miguel just said, planning is one of those areas. It's like meter maids. The more we have, or maid, that's the wrong term now. It's like parking enforcement. Sorry. The more you're revenue generating, in the sense that we have lots of projects that need to get through the system and will generate revenue for the city and help grow the city. And so, ignore everything Miguel said and hire people fast.
Yes, sir.
Although, just for a point of reference, my colleague was in no way referencing the fact that any tickets at all by anybody of any agency is for revenue.
Yes. Absolutely, which has to do with another topic.
Salutary effect. That's it?
and Mr. Chair, I would just agree with that standpoint. Hire as many people as you can, because without a doubt, that helps us move forward on things that ultimately generate revenue and economic development. So another department where we encourage you not to slow down on hiring.
Indeed. Okay, is that it for planning, members? All right. Thank you very much. Let's bring sanitation up next. Mr. Blumenfield, we still have the floor for sanitation.
Okay. Look, I know other colleagues may have questions.
I don't think so.
Regarding sanitation, when we implement the waste hauler franchise program, we'll free up dollars in our residential curbside collection program. So when do we get, and I noticed we've been taking from that program for the rest of the services, sanitation. So the question is, when will we free up any dollars from that program? And how will the curbside program, how will the waste hauler franchise program implement?
Lisa Mowry, Sanitation Chief Financial Officer. If I understand your question correctly, you're asking about an interconnection between the franchise and our curbside program, which are two completely separate programs. So none of the money related to the franchise as we go forward will have any tie back to our curbside because these are two separate customer classes.
Okay, so there's no linkage in that sense that when we have the franchise, we might offload some?
No, two completely different sets of customers.
Okay. And at the moment, we're reassigning existing staff from residential curbside program to others as needed, right?
Yeah, can you answer that one?
On page 42, we talk about that. Reassigning existing staff from that program to the rest of the year.
Wilson Poon with the CAO's office. So sanitation, in order to implement the Operation Healthy Streets as well as the Clean Streets program, has taken existing employees from its curbside program to staff these two programs, which encompass close to 80 positions. So they were never given additional positions to implement these, so they've been using its curbside, the ones that service the residential customers, and using as needed and overtime to backfill those routes.
Okay.
Right.
So it's not, there's no deficit in the curbside program of folks. We're still obviously able to handle all of that.
Right.
That's great.
All right. Thank you very. Anything else for sanitation members? All right. Thank you very much. Let's go next with animal services. Actually, why don't Mr. Kretz, do you have questions for animal services first?
Just a question on how we're doing on hiring. Are we close to caught up for all the positions that were allocated this fiscal year and last fiscal year?
We're very close on the hiring of the first 12. We were a little disappointed in the amount of time it took to establish the lists of eligible candidates. It took longer than we expected, but we have those lists now, and we're in the process of interviewing and making offers for 12 new officers and some vacant positions that we're going to be able to backfill. We are still sticking with our schedule of having those people come on board in March.
So will you be fully caught up by the end of the fiscal year, or you still have positions that are unfilled?
Well, we would expect to be caught up with that list of 12 and the backfills, the positions that are vacant now. We had also requested, actually 24 officers, and the additional 12 are the funds for that are covered in this mid-year request. And I did want to mention that we've had some delays. We had originally scheduled to ask for those additional 12 positions. There's $320,000 in the UB for that hiring, and we had intended to have them start this year and use those funds. We're a little bit delayed on the schedule for those 12. So I want to make that known. There's an action to move that $320,000 from a restricted position in the UB to an unrestricted place to make it available to other departments. And should we keep on our schedule and come back for those additional 12 positions, just want to make it clear that you had set aside the money to pay for those salaries, and this mid-year would make those funds available for other departments.
So if we want the those positions to still be filled in this year and the money to be there, do we need to give direction to keep those funds restricted?
Excuse me, Councilmember. Jacob Wexford, the CEO. There is no recommendation in this report to move those funds from the current line item in the unappropriated balance to the reserve for mid-year adjustments. There's a statement that should we not be able to close the deficits that we identify in the report, we may need to go to other sources, and that was identified as a potential source that we could do in the year-end report as due to the delay in hiring. So there's no action that's taken. It's more of just a identification of potential solutions in the year-end.
Okay, so for this quarter, it's not something we need to take action on? Just
no.
Keep an eye on. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield.
You recommend the transfer of $300,000 from the UB to pay for the EIR for the trap neuter return program, which is great. I support that and was pushing for it last year in the budget. It's going to save us money. It's going to save animal lives. It's wonderful. But I've heard varying numbers about the cost of the EIR.
Yes.
It seems to change all the time. So is the 300,000 final number? Is that what it takes? Is that what it's going to?
That's what it's going to take for Bureau of Engineering to get started. The total cost will be more than the 300,000. Our department general manager has been working with the city attorney's office, with the mayor's office and others, and with the Bureau of Engineering. And the estimated total cost is, with a contingency, is at about 800,000. So this is what the Bureau of Engineering says they will need to see in their account to get the process started.
So they get the process started. When do we need to come up with the other 500?
Well, the 300,000 will allow the work to continue through the rest of this fiscal year, so we will be seeking an additional 500,000 in the next budget cycle.
And then that, yes, sir. And then we would complete it within the year?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Kretz?
No, that's the exact other thing I wanted to speak to. So.
Anything further?
And I was going to raise the same number. I've heard about $500,000 additional dollars. So if we plan on doing this, we need to do it knowing the whole expenditure is $800,000. But I agree, at the end of the day, it's the only thing that will allow us to start to reduce the number of kittens out there, which is the biggest remaining problem in the shelter system if we want to actually get to no kill. We absolutely have to get past this lawsuit into the EIR.
Thank you.
Members, anything further? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and bring up DOT next. And we'll start with Mr. Bonin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Good. Wanted to start, one of the issues that already has come up is the loss of, or the diminishing amount of revenue we get from parking tickets. I wanted to actually address that sort of head on at the beginning of what I talked about with the department, because I think for a very long time we've sort of had a binary approach in the city of Los Angeles. We could either be more mean or more aggressive about enforcement, which makes people in the districts unhappy and get more revenue, or we can be a little more lax and get less revenue. But I think we have very fortunately discovered over the past couple of years that there's a third way. The Express Park program we've been doing downtown, which has allowed us to have demand-based pricing for our meters and has allowed people to pay what the market demands. If there's not a lot of demand, they don't pay a lot for the meter. If there is a lot of demand, then they pay more. And that has increased the use of the available parking downtown. It's actually decreased the amount the average person pays, and it has actually increased the amount we've brought in. So we've seen that demand-based pricing, commuter, the Express Park program has actually given us the ability in a certain area to bring in more revenue. In T Committee, as part of a parking reform package, we're going to be talking about expanding Express Park out to other parts of the city. As we get to that, over the next couple weeks, is there going to be a funding problem in having the resources to do that? It pays off in the long run, but is there a financial investment we're going to need to make first?
Ida Rubio with the Office of the CAO. There is a package in the mayor's proposed budget for Express Park staffing. It's still being considered right now, so the revenue or the funding aspect would be funding directly from SPRF to pay for those positions.
Okay.
I'm really not at liberty to discuss the proposed budget right now. We'll see that in a couple of weeks.
You just did. Selwyn, anything you want to add?
No, I'd have to, Selwyn Hollins, Department of Transportation. It will be contingent, our ability to roll it out and how effectively we roll it out is contingent upon our budget package. So depending on how that turns out, we'll adjust accordingly and we'll keep moving forward.
Good. I just wanted to point that out now because I know that the diminishing revenue is a concern. There's a way around that by doing Express Park and by doing demand-based pricing around the city where it doesn't require us to be being more aggressive about ticketing and stuff like that. There's a way to get meter revenue in. A couple questions about things that we approved in last year's budget that I know have taken a long time to get going. The thing I mentioned earlier when Miguel was at the table was the speed hump program. We put in some money to create a position that would start bringing the speed hump program back to at least, if not to give us the ability to install speed humps proactively, but to allow people who want to pay for them, like if somebody has a development coming in, you want the developer to pay for speed humps in the area nearby, to be allowed to do that. Where are we on bringing that position back?
Okay, the position you're referring to was a new position authority in this year's fiscal year budget. It was funded for 9 months. At the time, we didn't have a civil service list, so what the department did was we actually reassigned a person, existing employee in the department, to take on that function. That person is actually working on the new policy that we were going to present to council, to the T committee, on how we would be moving forward with this. The understanding we had in this budget was the sole purpose of the position, to implement a full program, to do all of the legwork, all of the outreach, all of the studies and all is a little bit more in depth. It is our understanding there are certain entities that are willing to pay for that. And so the policy would help address that. But at the same time, you have a huge number of people who don't have the means to do that, and being fair and transparent to them as well was part of the concern.
So that position was filled?
The position is filled, yes.
Okay.
And there is someone who's actively working on it. The position was authorized as a Transportation Associate 1. Our department doesn't have ones, we have 2s. Because this is such an important desire of council, we wanted to put someone with some experience on this one so that it gets off to a great start, as opposed to bringing someone new off the streets to try to address this very complex program.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz.
So what do we think the reason is for the reduction in parking fines up till now?
Good afternoon, Brian Hill, Deputy Chief. We are tracking approximately 6% below the budgeted issuance rate at the present time. I think there are a few factors that we can say are attributed to that. Primarily would be our staffing shortage with regard to the part-time traffic officer program. We recently transitioned 33 part-time officers to our full-time, so we are at full authorized strength in terms of our full-time staff. However, as you can imagine or know, when we transition part-time to full-time, then our part-time ranks are diminished. What we have seen through the recruitment effort, there is some waning interest, it appears, whether that's as a result of the economy, improving somewhat, that there's less interest in the part-time program. Also, a number of our part-time officers have been successful in obtaining full-time employment elsewhere. So we're seeing a higher attrition rate in our part-time program.
So the part-time program worked partly because people were a little more desperate in bad economic times. Sort of what one expected. Doesn't pay as well, doesn't provide benefits as much. So the question is, now or coming into the next budget, should we be looking at reducing or eliminating the part-time position because it's so hard to fill and adding more full-timers?
Well, I think we do have a new bulletin that's going to be coming out next month, and that bulletin will incorporate some additional options for individuals to apply and to be eligible for the position. So I would be interested to see what type of result and success we have with the upcoming exam bulletin. The part-time program is an excellent opportunity for someone to come into the department and see whether or not the job is a good fit for them, that they will enjoy working for the city, as well as for us to get a good look at the individual as to whether they would be a good fit for the organization as well.
Yeah, also if there's a way to shorten the time transitioning between part-time and full-time, it might also make sense for us, because I suspect we're training a lot of people who do a good job in part-time and then go find a full-time job somewhere else doing the same thing and have City of LA on their resume. So I don't know if there's a way to look at whether there's an appropriate cutoff point that could be sooner so that we don't lose some of those folks.
We are looking at that. Of course, as soon as we do have the authorization to be fully staffed at the full-time level, so as we have vacancy at the full-time ranks, we move our part-time officers into those positions. We transition over 200 part-time officers into full-time positions.
If we're short, as I've probably been saying since I got here, we should try and keep these ranks filled, because they do enforcement that we need and they generate revenue, and it's a win-win. There's no advantage for us to being understaffed in this department.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Questions were covered.
All right. Anything else, members, for DO2? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and bring up fire next. Mr. Blumenfield, want to start off on fire?
Sure. On page 29, you talk about the overtime issue. We're in terms of we're getting a reduction because we're not getting the money from overtime on the contract cities or the cities that we're working with outside of LA. Wanted to understand that problem a little bit more and what we can do to fix that so that we don't lose unfunded overtime for officers sent to fires outside of the city.
Emilio Rodriguez, Fire Department. As you've observed, there's been extraordinary activity over the summer and fall months, in particular with the assistance with fires outside the city. The department has deployed additional resources to the tune of over $3.5 million. Typically, the department collects that in the same fiscal year, but because of the magnitude of this activity, it could carry over into the next fiscal year. But being where we are in the process now with billing, I think we should recover a good proportion of that in the current fiscal year.
Is that up to? Is it us billing, or are they having trouble paying and we're cutting them a break or giving them a little extra time? How does that work with other districts? Or is it an issue? I mean, maybe it's not even a problem. Maybe this is just the regular course of doing things, and I shouldn't worry about it.
We're not anticipating any issues with regard to the collection process from other agencies at this time.
So it's really just a timing question, because we had a lot of fires. We deployed more resources than usual. That accounts down a little bit. that accounts for some of our less funding at this point, but that'll compensate for itself as we go through the year.
Right. Go ahead.
Just Mara Legaspi with the Office of the CAO. When we refer to unfunded overtime, we just mean that in the budget, there's no funding provided to the fire department for overtime, but later on, it does come as reimbursements in the terms of revenue, and so the deficit is in the operating budget, but when the department bills the agencies for the fires, then we get that as revenue, which will come in later.
Mr. Bonin? Mr. President? Just the one note that I wanted to raise here. I saw that there's still a surplus in salaries due to the civilian vacancy rate. And it's been a priority, I think, for all of us to try to get those civilian vacancies hired up, especially the mechanics positions and other positions that keep vehicles on the road. So as an interim measure to balance the deficit, that's fine, but what's the longer-term view of getting those positions filled?
Again, the mechanics position in particular, there's about a 20% vacancy rate in our civilian. There's about 80 vacancies overall. 14 of those vacancies are in the mechanic class. There are open lists for those. The department is actively recruiting off of the list, so we do hope to get a lot of those backfilled soon.
Are you having difficulty filling those positions?
No, there's managed hiring process is lifted. It's just, the department overall has 80 vacancies in civilian. We're also hiring for the sworn, and it's just, a matter of timing with our current staffing resources.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And then finally, if there's nothing else for fire, that brings up City Attorney. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Blumenfield, do you want to start off?
Sure. My usual question is always about our liability account and how we can, especially as we're going to hear all these other cases, but I'm not going to ask you about that. The temporary paralegals that we have in the city, we noticed that we've got a lot of them. Would it make more financial sense to be hiring some more permanent paralegals to deal with that, or is there a reason that we continue to rely on a lot of temporary paralegals?
Well, I think we relied on a lot of temporary paralegals, largely for budgetary reasons. I think in terms of quality, we'd do better if we had permanent. But I think we're probably comfortable waiting until this budget cycle gets through to hire permanently.
We have made a request, in the upcoming budget for some permanent paralegals as part of the Police Employment Division, as well as other necessary support staff that should address the need in the future.
Members, anything else for City Attorney? Mr. Ender? It's not necessarily a discussion for today, but we do have our request for a report back on the categories of claims and so forth, the historical liability claims.
We are pulling all that together.
Great. Any estimate on when we will be able to have that back?
I'd say in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Great. In terms of the challenge that we're having with the liability claims account now because of some really extraordinary cases that came in this budget year in part, in light of our cash flow challenges, I guess I would just, that happens. It's always going to be spiky. We're always going to have unexpected things. I would just ask that to the extent that we can forestall some settlement payments and so on until after July 1st in order to assist with the city's general cash flow issues on this budget year, that would be helpful.
We are very conscious of that, Mr. Chairman, and working our hardest to manage as best we can. Everyone we can push off, we're trying to.
Great. All right. Anything else for City Attorney? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So then, members, with that, if there's no other questions for CAO.
Council member?
Yes.
If I may, Maria Gutierrez with the City Administrative Officer. We do have about 3 amendments to our CAO report. We did provide the recommended amendments to your staff and to your city clerk.
They should be on your desks, members.
The
written.
The amendments are to recommendation number 3. We have submitted a revised attachment 5, which includes a technical correction involving a transfer within the Human Resources Benefit Fund. There's a $3.5 million transfer to the workers' comp account that is discussed in the report but was inadvertently omitted in the attachment. There was also a request of the police department to add a recommendation to transfer $500,000 to address a shortfall in civilian overtime for the police 911 call centers. That transfer is also reflected in the revised attachment. And lastly, we have a request from your CLA for inclusion of a transfer of $3,306.66 from your unappropriated balance general account to the Information Technology Agency overtime account. And all those are discussed in the information that was submitted to your clerk. And we would request that these be included as part of your actions today.
All right. Then, members, if there's no objections or concerns, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the FSR as amended. All right, thank you very much. That concludes our open session agenda items, and we'll now proceed to closed session. Does the city attorney have a preference as to order? All right, members, there being no other items before the committee, we are adjourned.